Emily Carter worked at a fancy restaurant in New York City. Every evening, she put on her clean white shirt, tied her hair neatly, and walked through the restaurant doors with a soft smile. She was a waitress, but there was something about her that felt different. The other waiters joked that she was too gentle, too polite, and too quiet for a place filled with noise, laughter, and expensive people. But Emily didn't mind. She came to work, did her job, and went home. That was her routine. The restaurant was known for its rich customers, people who wore shining watches, talked loudly about money, and left big tips if they were in a good mood. Emily served them all with the same quiet grace. She didn't talk much, but everyone noticed how careful she was, how she remembered small details about people, their favorite drink, how they liked their food, what table they preferred. Some customers liked her because she listened. Others ignored her like she didn't exist. Behind her calm face, Emily carried a heavy past. No one at work really knew who she was before she became just a waitress. She lived in a small one-room apartment on the edge of the city. It wasn't much, but it was hers. After work, she often walked home instead of taking the bus, letting the cold wind hit her face as she listened to the faint music from passing cars. Sometimes she stopped near a cafe window where someone was playing piano. Her eyes would soften, her fingers twitching slightly, like they remembered something her mind was trying to forget. But no one saw that part of her. To them, she was just Emily, the quiet waitress who worked hard and never complained. Her coworkers were friendly enough. There was Sarah, who was always gossiping about the rich guests, and Mark, who liked to make jokes to lighten the mood. They often teased Emily for being so serious. "You should smile more," Sarah would say. Emily would smile politely, but it never quite reached her eyes. She wasn't unhappy, but she wasn't truly happy either. It was as if she was living a quiet life in the shadow of something she had lost. On busy nights, the restaurant buzzed with laughter and the clinking of glasses. Waiters rushed around with trays full of expensive food. A live band sometimes played soft music, but there was also an old upright piano near the bar that almost no one touched. Dust gathered on its keys, and most nights it sat silent. But Emily always noticed it. Every time she passed by, her eyes lingered on it for a second longer than necessary. One evening, when the restaurant was quieter than usual, Emily found herself alone near the piano. She wiped the nearby tables, humming softly to herself. Without thinking, her hand brushed across the piano's wooden edge. She looked around. No one was watching. Slowly, she pressed one key. The soft note filled the air, and for a moment she forgot where she was. Her heart skipped. Memories flooded her mind of a time when she used to play freely, when music was her world. But then a voice called out from the kitchen. "Emily, can you take table 5? She blinked, quickly stepping back, her hands tightening around her tray. "Coming," she said, forcing a smile. The moment was gone, and she went back to work as if nothing had happened. At that table sat a group of businessmen talking about their latest investments. One of them, tall and confident, was a familiar face. Alexander Grant, a millionaire who often dined there. He was known for his charm, but also his arrogance. He liked attention, and people liked giving it to him. Emily had served him before. He never remembered her name, but he always noticed how quiet she was. To him, that made her an easy target for his jokes. That night, as Emily poured wine and cleared plates, she heard his loud laughter echo across the room. She kept her head down, pretending not to hear his remarks about people who serve instead of succeed. It wasn't the first time someone had said something cruel around her. She'd learned to smile through it, to hide her feelings behind calm eyes. But deep inside, a small spark lived within her. It was faint, buried under years of sadness and routine, but it was still there. The love for music, for the piano, for the feeling of keys beneath her fingers. She hadn't played properly in years, not since her parents' accident, not since her life fell apart. Music had once been her future. Now, it was a secret she carried like a ghost in her chest. That night, as she left work, the streets were quiet and the air smelled of rain. Emily wrapped her coat tighter and walked past the dark windows of the restaurant. Through the glass, she could still see the piano, sitting lonely in the corner. For a moment, she stopped and stared at it. Her reflection in the glass looked tired, but strong. She whispered softly, almost to herself, "One day," and then turned away into the night. She didn't know it yet, but that same piano, the one she walked past every night, was about to change her life forever. And soon, the quiet waitress that everyone overlooked would make the entire world stop and listen. The next evening began like any other. The restaurant lights glowed softly, and the air buzzed with the sound of laughter, glasses clinking, and slow jazz playing in the background. Emily walked in right on time, tying her apron neatly and greeting her co-workers with her usual quiet smile. She didn't know that tonight was going to change everything. Around 8 p.m., the front doors opened and the mood of the restaurant shifted. Everyone seemed to straighten up automatically. The reason was simple. Alexander Grant had just walked in. He wasn't just rich, he was famous for being rich. His face appeared on magazine covers, his business deals were discussed on television, and his parties were the kind most people only read about online. He had that kind of presence that made people notice him instantly, confident, loud, and surrounded by an air of power. He entered with a group of other wealthy men and women, all laughing at some story he was telling. His voice filled the room, smooth, deep, and a little too proud. Emily watched him from behind the counter as he handed his coat to the hostess without a second glance. He didn't even look around. He already knew that everyone was looking at him. "Grant party, table 12, whispered Sarah beside Emily. "He booked the private dining section. Be careful, Em. He's in one of his moods tonight." Emily nodded quietly. She didn't need to be told twice. She had served him a few times before. He was polite on the surface, but there was always a sharp edge to his words, like he enjoyed watching people squirm just a little. When she approached his table, he was in the middle of telling a joke. Everyone laughed, except her. She placed the wine bottle on the table and started pouring. Grant leaned back in his chair, studying her like she was part of the entertainment. "Well, look who's back," he said with a smirk. "You again. You never smile, do you?" Emily gave a small, polite smile. "I'm smiling, sir," she said softly. "That," he chuckled. "That's barely a smile. You're too serious for someone your age. You should relax a little." His friends laughed again. Emily simply nodded and continued her work, steady hands, calm eyes. She had learned long ago not to react. Grant wasn't used to being ignored. He liked attention, and her quietness somehow irritated him. As dinner went on, he ordered expensive wine, cracked louder jokes, and talked about his achievements. He told stories about his private jets, his new mansion, and how hard it was to find real talent these days. That was when something unexpected caught his eye. The piano. It sat quietly in the corner, untouched as usual. Grant grinned mischievously. "You know," he said to his guests, "I always wondered why they keep that piano here. I bet no one in this place even knows how to play it." A few of his guests laughed. "Probably just decoration," one woman said, sipping her drink. Emily, standing nearby with her tray, froze for a moment. She glanced toward the piano, then quickly looked away. But Grant noticed that tiny movement. "Wait," he said, turning to her. "You looked at it. Don't tell me you can play." Emily blinked, caught off guard. "I used to," she replied softly. "A long time ago." The guests chuckled. Grant leaned forward, eyes glinting with mischief. "Oh, really? A waitress who plays piano. Now that's something I've got to see." Her heart skipped. "I don't think—" "Oh, come on," he interrupted, waving his hand. "What's the harm? Play something for us. Let's hear what the restaurant's hidden talent sounds like." The table burst into laughter. Emily's cheeks flushed. Every eye in the room turned toward her. Even her co-workers looked uneasy. The manager standing near the bar didn't intervene. After all, Grant was one of their best-paying clients. "Sir, I really shouldn't," she whispered. Grant leaned back, smirking. "Why not? You You afraid to embarrass yourself? Don't worry, it'll be fun. We could all use a little music, right? His words were smooth but cutting, designed to humiliate her politely. The guests nodded eagerly, some clapping their hands. Yes, play, something. Emily felt trapped. If she refused, she'd look rude, maybe even risk her job. But if she played, she wasn't sure she could. It had been years. Her hands trembled slightly and her heart pounded. Grant smiled wider. Come on now, it's an order from your favorite customer. A few people laughed. The sound felt heavy, cruel. Emily took a deep breath. For a moment she thought of saying no, but then she looked toward the piano again. It was right there. The same one she'd touched the night before. The same one that made her remember who she used to be. Something shifted inside her. Maybe it was pride, maybe defiance. Slowly, she set her tray down and walked toward the piano. The laughter quieted a little as everyone watched her. The restaurant, usually loud, fell strangely silent. She sat down on the old bench, her fingers hovering just above the dusty keys. Her reflection stared back at her in the polished black surface. The quiet waitress everyone ignored. Behind her, Alexander Grant chuckled softly. Let's hope this doesn't ruin dinner. Emily closed her eyes. She exhaled once, slowly, and then she pressed the first key. The note was soft, trembling, but it was alive. A hush fell over the room. She began to play. For a few seconds, no one moved. The sound that came from the piano was soft, almost hesitant, like a whisper. Emily's hands trembled slightly as she touched the keys again, her body stiff with nerves. But as the notes began to flow, something in her eyes changed. At first, the guests were amused. They leaned back, smiling, expecting a few clumsy notes, maybe a funny mistake or two. Alexander Grant smirked, swirling his wine. Go on then, little waitress, he murmured under his breath, loud enough for his table to hear. Show us your talent. But the laughter faded faster than anyone expected, because Emily didn't play like someone who was nervous or untrained. Her fingers started to move with grace, slow at first, then faster, smoother, more confident. The melody rose and fell like waves, soft but strong, every note carrying emotion. It wasn't some simple tune she was repeating from memory. It was something deep, something that came from within her. Music filled with both pain and beauty. The restaurant grew quiet. Even the waiters stopped in their tracks. Plates clinked softly as people turned their heads to watch. The guests who had been laughing now sat frozen, their smiles fading as the sound surrounded them. Emily's eyes were closed now. She wasn't playing for them anymore. She was playing for herself. The years she had spent hiding her past, the nights she walked home alone, the memories of the accident that took her parents, the silence that replaced the music, all of it poured out through her hands. Every key she pressed was like a heartbeat she had been holding in for too long. The song grew louder, bolder. It wasn't something anyone in the restaurant recognized. It was original, a melody that sounded like it belonged to another world. Her fingers moved so fast that a few strands of her hair fell loose around her face, but she didn't notice. She was lost in the rhythm. When she finally stopped, the last note hung in the air for a long, breathless moment. No one clapped, no one moved. The silence was heavy, filled with shock and awe. Emily slowly opened her eyes, her chest rising and falling. She looked around, half afraid of what she'd see. Maybe laughter, maybe pity. But all she saw were faces frozen in disbelief. One woman near the front had tears in her eyes. A man whispered, "Who is she?" Alexander Grant, sitting with his glass halfway to his mouth, didn't speak. For the first time that night, he didn't have a single clever thing to say. His smirk was gone, replaced by something else. Confusion, maybe even guilt. Emily stood up quietly. "Excuse me," she said softly, her voice steady now. "I should get back to work, But before she could move, the restaurant erupted into applause. It started with one person, then another, and soon the entire room was clapping, loudly, sincerely. People stood up from their tables cheering, calling out her name even though they barely knew it. Emily froze in shock. Her hands shook again, but this time not from fear, from disbelief. The manager, red-faced and speechless, finally smiled proudly, as if he had always known. Sarah, her co-worker, wiped her eyes. "Emily, that was beautiful," she whispered. Grant leaned forward, still watching her. His eyes narrowed slightly, not in anger, but in realization. He had tried to humiliate her, to make her look small, and instead, she had turned his cruel little game into something unforgettable. "Where did you learn to play like that?" he finally asked, his tone quieter, less sharp now. Emily gave him a faint smile. "A long time ago," she said simply. Before anyone could ask more, she walked away, head held high, back straight. She didn't rush, didn't hide. She just returned to her tray, like nothing extraordinary had happened. But the truth was, everything had changed. All through the night, guests kept whispering about her. "Did you record that? She must be a professional. No waitress plays like that." Phones were raised, videos were taken, and before the night ended, the clips were already being shared online. Grant's table stayed mostly silent. One of his friends leaned toward him and whispered, "Well, you got your show. Guess the joke's on us." He didn't respond. For the first time, Alexander Grant felt something he wasn't used to. Embarrassment. Not because Emily had defied him, but because she had done it with such grace, such effortless dignity. He had wanted to make her feel small. Instead, she had made him feel smaller. As Emily clocked out later that night, she stood outside the restaurant for a long time, her heart still racing. The cold wind brushed against her face, but she barely felt it. Somewhere behind her, through the window, she could still see the piano, now surrounded by curious people, still talking about her performance. She smiled faintly. Not a shy, polite smile. A real one. For the first time in years, she felt alive again. But she had no idea that this was only the beginning. Somewhere across the city, people were already sharing her video. The comments were flooding in. "Who is she? This woman plays with her soul. Find her name." By the next morning, Emily Carter, the quiet waitress who no one noticed, would be known to thousands of people, and the man who had tried to humiliate her would realize that in trying to embarrass her, he had helped uncover a forgotten star. The next morning, Emily woke up to the buzzing sound of her phone. It wouldn't stop ringing. At first, she thought it was a mistake, maybe a wrong number or a spam call. But when she finally checked the screen, her heart skipped. Dozens of missed calls, hundreds of messages. Notifications filled her screen like rain. She sat up slowly, rubbing her eyes, her messy hair falling over her face. The tiny apartment around her looked the same. The small table, the chipped mug from last night, the sound of traffic outside. But something in the air felt different. Her friend and co-worker, Sarah, had sent her 20 messages in a row. "Emily, you're all over the internet. Your piano video went viral. You have to see this right now." Emily blinked. Viral? That didn't make sense. She opened one of the links Sarah sent, a short clip from the restaurant. It was her. Sitting at the piano, her eyes closed, hands moving across the keys like they had a life of their own. The video had already reached over 2 million views. The comments were endless. Who is this girl? Waitress or genius? This is the most emotional performance I've ever heard. She plays like she's telling a story. Emily's hands trembled as she read them. It felt unreal, like watching someone else's life. At the restaurant that afternoon, people were already talking about it. When she walked in, her co-workers clapped and cheered. Sarah ran up to her, laughing and crying at the same time. "You have no idea what's happening," she shouted. "Reporters called the restaurant. Some record company wants to talk to you. You're literally famous overnight." Emily could barely respond. She smiled shyly, still trying to process it. She had spent years being invisible. Now everyone suddenly wanted to see her. Even the manager, who usually barely noticed her, was suddenly overly polite. "Ah, Emily," he said with a nervous smile. "If the press calls, let's make sure they mention our restaurant name, yes?" She nodded, too stunned to argue. But not everyone was so cheerful. At a corner table, Alexander Grant sat alone, reading something on his phone. When Emily passed by, he looked up. For once, his confident smirk was gone. His expression was unreadable, a mix of surprise, respect, and maybe even regret. He spoke quietly, so only she could hear. "You really showed me something last night." Emily paused, unsure how to reply. "It wasn't about showing anyone," she said softly. "I just played." Grant nodded slowly, setting his glass down. "Well, you played beautifully. I owe you an apology." She gave a small smile. "You don't owe me anything. It's over." But he wasn't done. "You're special, Emily. People like you shouldn't be serving tables. You should be performing." She looked away. That part of my life is gone," she murmured, walking off before he could say more. But the truth was, something inside her had started to awaken again. That night she sat in her apartment, staring at the little electric keyboard she hadn't touched in years. Her parents had given it to her when she was 10, back when she was a child prodigy who played at concerts and competitions, back when people believed she'd become one of the greats. After her parents' accident, she had stopped. Music had become too painful. Every note reminded her of what she'd lost. She had promised herself she'd never play again. But now, people around the world were asking for more. Her email inbox was full of requests, interviews, invitations, even offers to perform on talk shows. Some people claimed to recognize her from old music competitions. One journalist even wrote, "Is the viral waitress Emily Carter the same child prodigy who disappeared 10 years ago?" Emily stared at that headline for a long time. Her heart pounded as memories flooded back. The sound of her mother's laughter, her father cheering from the audience, her small fingers barely reaching the keys of a grand piano. She could still remember the last concert she ever played, the day before the accident. The applause had been deafening, and she had promised her parents she'd make them proud. She had kept that promise, until life broke it for her. Tears filled her eyes. She wiped them away quickly, took a deep breath, and sat down at the keyboard. For a few moments she just stared at it, her hands hovering above the keys. Then she began to play again. Softly at first, then louder. The music flowed out of her like a river breaking through a dam. Every note felt like coming home. She didn't think, didn't plan. She just let her emotions speak through the melody. When she finished, she sat silently in the dark, her fingers still resting on the keys. Outside her window, the city lights shimmered like stars. Somewhere out there, millions of people had heard her music and felt something real, something that reminded them of beauty and hope. For the first time in years, Emily smiled without forcing it. She realized something then. The world had found her again, not because of fame or luck, but because music had always been a part of her soul. And no matter how far she tried to run from it, it would always find its way back. What she didn't know was that her story was only beginning. Record producers were already searching for her. Old teachers were recognizing her. And soon, her quiet life as a waitress would be gone forever. But tonight, it wasn't about fame or money. It was just about her and the piano, two old friends finally reunited after years of silence. The world moved faster than Emily ever imagined. Within 2 days, her phone wouldn't stop ringing. Every news channel, every social media platform, every entertainment page was talking about her, the waitress who stunned a millionaire with her piano performance. People gave her names she never asked for. The angel pianist, the hidden prodigy, the girl with the golden hands. The restaurant that once treated her like background noise now treated her like a celebrity. Strangers came in just to meet her, take pictures, or ask her to play again. The manager even moved the piano to the center of the dining room, proudly telling customers, "This is where Emily Carter played, right here." But Emily wasn't comfortable with the attention. She smiled politely and thanked people, but fame still felt unreal to her. It didn't feel like her life. It felt like she was watching someone else's story unfold from a distance. Still, every night she stayed up late reading the comments under her video. People said her music helped them sleep, helped them cry, helped them feel. Some shared stories about losing loved ones, about finding peace in her melody. Those messages touched her heart more than anything else. She didn't want to be famous. She just wanted her music to mean something again. Meanwhile, Alexander Grant was fighting a different feeling. Shame. For the first time in years, his name wasn't being praised online. Instead, people were calling him arrogant, heartless, cruel. Someone had uploaded a clip of his mocking tone before Emily started playing. The caption read, "The billionaire who tried to humiliate her." The comments were brutal. He should be ashamed. Money can't buy class. Imagine being that shallow. Grant's PR team begged him to stay quiet, but he couldn't. He felt something heavy in his chest. Guilt. Not just because of how the world saw him, but because deep down, he knew the truth. Emily's music had shaken something inside him that money never could. He replayed her video over and over again, late at night, in his empty penthouse apartment. Each time, the same feeling washed over him. Regret mixed with admiration. He wanted to make it right. One afternoon, he returned to the restaurant. Everyone stared as he walked in. The same man who had once humiliated her was now quiet, serious, almost humble. He found Emily near the piano, polishing glasses between shifts. She froze when she saw him. "Mr. Grant?" He nodded slowly. "Emily." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence between them was heavy, but calm. "I know I was awful that night," he said finally. "I was arrogant, and I tried to make a joke at your expense. I'm sorry." Emily set down the glass and looked at him. His apology sounded genuine, but she didn't rush to forgive him. "Why are you really here?" she asked softly. He hesitated. "Because your music, it changed something in me. I haven't felt anything like that in years. I wanted to thank you, and maybe make it right." Emily sighed. "You don't have to fix anything, it's done." But Grant shook his head. "You don't understand. You have a gift, Emily. You shouldn't be playing for customers while they eat dinner. You should be on a stage." She looked down at the piano, her fingers brushing the keys gently. "I used to be," she whispered. "I know," he said. "I read about you. Emily Carter, the child prodigy who disappeared after her parents died." Her eyes widened. "You read about that?" "I did. And I realized how cruel I must have seemed that night. I didn't know who you were. I didn't know what you'd been through." Emily's throat tightened. She didn't want to cry, not in front of him. "It's not your fault," she said quietly. "Life happened. I moved on." "But maybe," he said softly, "you were never supposed to stop playing." His words hung in the air. Before she could respond, the restaurant door opened and a man in a suit walked in carrying a camera crew. "Excuse me, are you Emily Carter?" Emily blinked. "Yes?" "We're from Channel 7 News. We're doing a live feature on you, the Waitress pianist. Could we get a few words?" She froze. The cameras pointed toward her like bright, staring eyes. She wasn't ready for this. But the manager was already smiling nervously. Of course. She'd love to. Grant stepped back as the cameras surrounded her. She smiled shyly, and answered their questions. How she felt when she learned piano, what it was like to go viral. She was honest, simple, unpolished, and that's what people loved about her. That night, her interview aired across the country. People everywhere watched the humble waitress talk about music like it was something holy. By the next morning, her follower count had exploded. Musicians wanted to collaborate. Orchestras sent invitations. One famous producer tweeted, "If anyone knows how to reach Emily Carter, tell her we want her at the Winter Gala." The same Winter Gala Alexander Grant was sponsoring. When he saw the announcement, he smiled faintly. Fate had a strange sense of humor. Emily was finally being seen. Not as a waitress, not as a victim, but as an artist. And Grant knew this was only the start of her rise. He also knew he wanted to be there, not to control her, not to use her, but to support her this time. Because somewhere between her first note and her last, she had reminded him what real beauty looked like. The kind that money could never buy. And for Emily, the world that once ignored her had finally started to listen. The weeks that followed felt like a dream Emily couldn't quite wake up from. Every day, something new happened. An interview request, a music producer's message, an invitation to perform. Her video had crossed 10 million views, and her name was everywhere. Strangers stopped her in the street, asking for photos or telling her how her music made them cry. The world that had once walked past her without noticing now couldn't stop looking. But fame was strange. It didn't feel real. Sometimes, as she served customers at the restaurant, she'd still hear whispers. That's her. The piano girl. The viral waitress. Some treated her like a celebrity, others like a curiosity. A few just stared. Emily remained polite, calm, and humble. But inside she felt torn, between the quiet life she had built and the world that was suddenly pulling her back into the spotlight she had once run away from. One evening she sat in her apartment scrolling through articles about herself. One headline caught her eye. The return of Emily Carter, child prodigy lost and found. The article included old photos of her as a child, smiling beside a grand piano, her parents standing proudly behind her. Seeing their faces again after so many years made her heart ache. Her mother's soft eyes, her father's hand on her shoulder. Tears filled her eyes before she even realized it. She closed the laptop and sat in silence for a long time. She thought about all the years she'd avoided music, the piano collecting dust, the dreams, he had buried under long work shifts and quiet nights. And now, the whole world was reminding her who she used to be. Later that week, a letter arrived at the restaurant addressed to her. It was written in neat, old-fashioned handwriting. She opened it carefully. It was from her old piano teacher, Mrs. Rowland. My dear Emily, I saw the video. I recognized your hands before I even saw your face. You always played with feeling, not just skill. I am so proud of you. If you are ready to return to music, I would love to help you prepare again. Not for fame, but for yourself. With love, Mrs. Rowland. Emily held the letter to her chest and smiled through her tears. She hadn't realized how much she missed hearing someone believe in her. That weekend, she visited Mrs. Rowland's old music studio, a small place filled with sheet music and the smell of coffee. When she entered, the older woman looked up from the piano and gasped softly. Emily Carter, she said, her eyes shining. You came back. They hugged, and for a while, neither spoke. It felt like time had folded back on itself, like the lost years were slowly finding their way home. Mrs. Rowland sat her down at the piano. Play for me, she said softly. Emily hesitated. I don't know if I still can. Her teacher smiled knowingly. Oh, I think you can. So Emily played. The melody was softer now, older, wiser. Her hands weren't as steady as they once were, but every note was filled with truth. When she finished, Mrs. Rowland had tears in her eyes. "You never lost it," she whispered. "You just stopped listening to it." Those words stayed in Emily's heart. Meanwhile, Alexander Grant was doing his own kind of listening. He had begun following her journey quietly, not as a businessman, but as someone who had learned humility. He watched her interviews, her practice clips, her simple social media posts. He couldn't explain why, but he felt invested. Not in her fame, but in her peace. She had changed him, and he wanted to support her in any way he could. So when he heard she had been invited to perform at the Winter Charity Gala, the same one he was sponsoring, he made a decision. He would make sure that night belonged entirely to her. On the day of the gala, the city glittered with snow. The grand hall was filled with the richest and most powerful people in New York, all dressed in shimmering gowns and black tuxedos. Cameras flashed as guests entered. Emily arrived in a simple, elegant white dress. She looked nervous, but radiant. She wasn't used to such glamour, but her calm presence made her stand out even more. Grant spotted her from across the room and walked up to her slowly. "You look incredible," he said sincerely. She smiled politely. "Thank you, Mr. Grant." He shook his head. "Alexander," he corrected softly. They both laughed quietly. The tension between them had faded into something lighter, something that almost felt like friendship. As the night went on, the host took the stage. "And now," he announced, "a very special guest, the one and only Emily Carter." Applause filled the hall as she walked to the grand piano on stage. Her heart pounded, but she closed her eyes and took a deep breath. Then she began to play. The music that filled the room was unlike anything anyone had heard before. It was full of emotion, joy, sorrow, love, loss. It was her story, told through sound. The crowd listened in silence, captivated. Even the cameras forgot to flash. When she finished, the applause was thunderous. People stood cheering and clapping. Some even wiped tears from their eyes. Alexander stood too, clapping the loudest. For the first time, he wasn't the most powerful person in the room, and he didn't want to be. That night, Emily didn't just reclaim her talent, she reclaimed her life. And as she bowed, the world saw not just a waitress or a viral sensation, but a woman who had turned pain into music and humiliation into grace. After that night at the Winter Gala, everything changed for Emily Carter. The video of her performance spread like wildfire. News outlets called it a soul reborn through music. Social media flooded with clips of her playing, people writing things like, "This is what pure emotion sounds like," and "I've never seen anyone play with such heart." By the next week, record labels were calling nonstop. Talk shows wanted her as a guest. Concert halls wanted her on their stages. But Emily didn't let it get to her head. She still woke up early, still made her morning tea, still walked through the city streets like an ordinary person. Even though the world now saw her as a star, she didn't feel like one. What she wanted most wasn't fame. It was peace. When she wasn't doing interviews or rehearsing, she visited Mrs. Rowland, her old teacher. Together they practiced for hours, talking about music, life, and the strange way fate had brought her back to the piano. Mrs. Rowland would often say, "Fame is loud, Emily, but music, real music, whispers. Don't let the noise drown your song." Emily took those words to heart. Meanwhile, Alexander Grant watched her rise quietly. After the gala, he had kept his distance, but he never stopped following her journey. He read every article, watched every performance. There was pride in his chest, and something else too, something softer. He had attended the gala expecting to be the host, the center of attention. But when Emily played, he realized for the first time that beauty didn't need wealth, and talent didn't need approval. He had tried to humiliate her once, and she had responded not with anger, but with grace. That grace had changed him. In the weeks that followed, Grant started doing something he had never done before. Listening. He listened to his staff instead of ordering them around. He started funding music programs for underprivileged kids. He even donated a grand piano to the very restaurant where Emily had once worked, with a small plaque that read, "To the music that lives in everyone, discovered or hidden." The manager nearly fainted when he saw the donation slip. When Emily found out, she smiled gently. "He's not who he was that night," she said. "Maybe none of us are." But fame, even gentle fame, came with pressure. One morning, she woke up to see articles speculating about her personal life, headlines like, "Who is Emily Carter dating?" and "Billionaire Alexander Grant secretly mentoring the viral pianist." Photographers began following her outside her apartment. Strangers asked invasive questions. A few even spread rumors that her humble act was just part of her image. It hurt, not because people doubted her, but because she had finally learned to open her heart, and the world seemed eager to twist it. One evening, overwhelmed, she went to the park alone. The winter air bit at her skin as she sat on a bench, wrapping her scarf tighter. The city lights shimmered in the distance, and for a while, she just sat in silence. Then, a familiar voice said softly, "I thought I'd find you here." She turned. It was Alexander, wearing a long coat, his usual confidence replaced by quiet concern. "You shouldn't be out here alone," he said gently. She smiled faintly. "I needed to think. Everything's too much." He sat beside her. "Fame usually is. It looks shiny from far away, but up close, it's heavy." They sat there in silence for a while, watching the snow fall. After a long pause, "See," Emily asked, "do you ever wish you could start over?" Alexander smiled sadly. "Every day. But you can't change your past. You can only change the person it made you become." Emily looked at him, her eyes soft. "You've changed a lot, Alexander." He chuckled quietly. "You're the one who changed me." She didn't answer. She just smiled, the kind of smile that carried both gratitude and understanding. As they sat there, the city seemed quieter somehow, like even the world was listening. In the days that followed, Emily made a choice. She turned down several big offers that wanted to commercialize her story. Instead, she accepted an invitation from the New York Philharmonic to perform a charity concert for children who couldn't afford music lessons. "It's not about being famous," she told the reporters. "It's about giving back what music gave to me, hope." The concert was a success beyond words. Hundreds of children sat in the audience, eyes wide with wonder. Emily played not to impress, but to inspire. Every note she played that night carried love, memory, and meaning. After her final piece, she looked out into the crowd and smiled. She could see Alexander standing near the back, clapping with quiet pride. Their eyes met for a brief moment, a silent thank you passing between them. And just like that, Emily realized something powerful. Life had taken her through pain, humiliation, and loss. But through it all, she had never really lost her music. It had just been waiting for her to believe in herself again. That night, as she bowed to the audience, the applause didn't sound like noise anymore. It sounded like forgiveness, not just from others, but from herself. A year had passed since that unforgettable night at the restaurant, the night a quiet waitress touched the piano and changed her life forever. The world now knew Emily Carter not as the waitress pianist, but as one of the most inspiring musicians of her generation. Her music wasn't just about notes. It was about stories, about emotion, about healing. She had released her first album, performed at charity galas, and appeared on stages around the world. Yet she remained the same gentle, humble person she'd always been. But tonight felt different. It was a cold evening in New York City, the sky painted with shades of silver and gold as the winter charity gala began once again. The same event where Emily had performed a year ago, and where everything had changed. This time, she wasn't the surprise guest. She was the main performer, the star of the night. The posters outside read, Emily Carter, From Silence to Symphony. Inside the grand hall, guests arrived in glittering gowns and elegant suits. Laughter echoed through the air, the sound of champagne glasses clinking and violins tuning. And at the center of it all, under a soft golden light, stood a grand piano, polished, perfect, waiting. Backstage, Emily adjusted her simple white dress. She didn't need jewels or glitter. The piano was her only decoration. As she looked at her reflection, she smiled softly. She thought of her parents, their faces, their laughter, their belief in her. She thought of Mrs. Rowland's kind words, of Sarah's support, of all the people who had believed in her music. And she thought of Alexander, the man whose cruel challenge had unexpectedly given her a second chance at life. As if her thoughts had called him, there was a gentle knock on the door. "Come in," she said. Alexander entered quietly, wearing a black tuxedo. His usual confidence was softened by something genuine, something real. "You're hard to catch these days," he said with a small smile. Emily chuckled softly. "You're still sponsoring the gala. I suppose I couldn't hide from you forever." He grinned. "You could have, if you wanted to." For a moment, they both stood in silence, memories between them like invisible threads. "You know," he said finally, "I think about that night often. I still can't believe I tried to embarrass you." Emily smiled kindly. "If you hadn't, maybe I would never have played again." He looked at her, his voice soft. "You don't hate me for it?" She shook her head. "No. Life has a strange way of turning pain into purpose. Maybe it was meant to happen." Alexander nodded slowly, emotion flickering in his eyes. "You changed me, Emily. You made me see the world differently. I started music programs across my foundations because of you. Kids who can't afford instruments now have them, because one waitress dared to play the piano that night." Emily's eyes filled with tears. She stepped forward and hugged him gently. "Then we both learned something, didn't we?" she whispered. The lights outside dimmed, a signal that her performance was about to begin. Alexander pulled back slightly. "Go," he said, smiling. "Show them what grace sounds like." Emily smiled back and walked toward the stage. As she stepped into the light, the crowd rose in applause. Cameras flashed, but she didn't look at them. Her eyes went straight to the piano. It was just her and the music now. She sat down, her hands resting on the keys. The noise faded, replaced by a deep, peaceful silence. Then, she began to play. The melody was soft at first, like a whisper of her past. Slowly it grew richer, warmer, filled with emotion. Every note told her story. The loneliness, the humiliation, the rediscovery, the forgiveness. People in the audience closed their eyes, some with tears streaming down their faces. The music carried them to places words could never reach. And then, near the end, she did something unexpected. She looked toward the crowd, found Alexander's face, and smiled before playing her final notes. The last chord echoed like a heartbeat through the hall, fading gently into silence. For a moment, no one moved. Then the applause began, soft, then thunderous. The entire room stood, clapping, cheering, crying. Emily stood slowly and bowed, her heart full. She didn't just hear applause, she felt love. She had finally made peace with her past, with her pain, with her gift, with herself. After the show, as guests began to leave, Alexander approached her again. He handed her a small velvet box. Inside was a golden keychain shaped like a piano. On the back, engraved in tiny letters, were the words, "To the girl who made the world listen." Emily smiled, her eyes shining. "Thank you," she whispered. He shrugged lightly. "No, Emily. Thank you." They stood there for a while, surrounded by the soft hum of fading applause. No grand speeches, no tears. Just two people who had changed each other's lives in ways neither could have predicted. As the lights dimmed and the hall emptied, Emily sat at the piano one last time. The world outside was quiet, snow beginning to fall softly against the windows. She pressed one final key, a single gentle note that lingered in the air like a promise. Because this time, she wasn't playing to prove anything. She wasn't playing to please anyone. She was playing simply because she loved it. And in that moment, surrounded by silence and light, Emily Carter, once a shy waitress, once a forgotten prodigy, had truly found herself again. Her story wasn't about fame or fortune. It was about grace, forgiveness, and the courage to play your own song, even when the world tries to silence it. And as the snow kept falling outside, her music, soft, timeless, and full of life, continued to echo in the hearts of everyone who had ever heard her play. Forever.